Hey guys, welcome back. We have another fantastic episode of the OT for Life podcast for you today. I'm bringing on a super awesome and super passionate occupational therapist from Northern California. Deedee Levine is an OT working in pediatrics within the school districts, and she also started her own private practice. We chat about how she uses gardens within her occupational therapy sessions and how she integrates a more holistic approach to therapy through doula and yoga practices. Deedee is huge into wellness, and it was great hearing about how she promotes wellness with her clients and the community as a whole. So let's dig in. If you're interested in occupational therapy, this is the place for you. This show aims to explore our profession by sharing who we are and what we do. Because for us, occupational therapy is more than just a job. Hi, I'm Sarah. Welcome to OT for Life. So welcome to the show, Deedee. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Sarah. I'm doing really well. I'm really excited to have a conversation with you.
I am too. I have really been looking forward to catching up with you and hearing about everything that you've been up to in the past couple years. But I'd like to start, if you wouldn't mind, just talking about your favorite part about being an occupational therapist.
So I think what originally drew me to occupational therapy was the intimacy that you're allowed to have in a Western medical or educational framework. And what I mean by this is that it seems that in OT, you're the practitioner that is most akin to family, if we're talking about like the ideal sense of family, in the sense of you're like a coach, you're support, you're working towards the person's development, their life goals, their lifestyle redesign. It seemed the most holistic approach to healing and rehabilitation that I could find in a Western model. So I really, really appreciate that about OT.
I actually hadn't even thought about that before, or at least been kind of aware of it. But I love that thought, because if you think about it, even just working with the clients, a lot of the times we're working on potentially these ADLs, the activities of daily living, that could be very kind of intimate, as well as working with the families or the caregivers, where you are really kind of having to jump into their lives and figure out what's going on and how you can best support them and promote progress within the patient or the client.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember in OT school, one of the first lines that you would ask somebody, or first questions you would ask someone in an OT interview when you're getting to know them, is, what do you like to do? And I was like, yeah, I'm in the right profession, because that's what I want to be asking. And how can we get back to that, or how can we reshape that so you can still enjoy it?
Yeah, and I think a lot of times that question will start, and especially with our clients, they'll give kind of basic things of hobbies or kind of these overall activities that are important to them. But then it's our job to really dive down deeper and figure out, well, why is this important? What are the steps that make this important to the person? And really just kind of get a deeper picture and a deeper understanding of their occupational profile and really kind of what makes them tick.
I love that too.
So I know that you are really big into gardening. And so I wanted to ask, what is your favorite flower?
Oh. Oh, that's a funny question. I think I really love dahlias, but mostly what I garden in when I'm doing OT stuff are edibles. And the reason I do that is because I really love having the food, like whether it be farm or garden bed to table concept, idea, and approach in my sessions.
So tell me a little bit about how you got into using garden therapy in occupational therapy.
Great question. In 2004, I believe, I transferred to UC Berkeley, and my original major was dietetics or nutrition, basically, because I have a deep affinity for food and health and wellness. And the more I got into that major, the more I was like, it was very heavy on the chemistry, and it was really more of a pre-med style of prerequisites. And I felt that that wasn't quite what I was looking for. And so I made a little shift, and I found a friend of mine was in the environmental college, environmental science of policy and management college. I decided, oh, maybe I'll go look at that. And so I took a few classes, and I ended up falling in love with the concept of agriculture and community and public health. And what ended up happening was I got my bachelor's of science at conservation and resource studies, which was this really cool interdisciplinary opportunity type major. And you pretty much could make it anything you want. And so what I did was I studied public health and community and school gardens. And my thesis at the time was, I remember the title was Gardens, and then it said, a multifunctional forum for health and education. And I wrote, I think it was like 50 or 60 pages just on how we can use gardens to promote health and wellness amongst various populations. And then when I got out of that and I graduated, I started becoming a naturalist for, which is basically like an environmental education specialist or an environmental educator in the Santa Monica Mountains for the Conejo Valley School District. And what I did with them was basically took kids on hikes and led hydrology workshops, meaning like where's our local watershed, or plant-based workshops like how to identify local plants, local flora. And I was taking classes at a time, and some of these classes had some special needs kids, and I really was curious and like interested in seeing the difference for those kids of how they were feeling therapeutically or even just like occupationally every day, how they were feeling in their school setting and versus in an outdoor education setting. And it became really apparent to me that there was like a healing potential that could occur outside versus inside for children, not only with special needs, but for general population. And then after that, I went and I became a preschool teacher for a few years. And I was so heavy on it as an advocate for school and community gardens at the time that I ended up getting some funding. I did like a fundraiser in the preschool to set up a school garden for the kids in the preschool. And I think I raised like $1,500 or something. And it was a few garden beds and like some plants and some trellis kind of plants. And I remember also buying a few more, like they had a lot of plastic equipment and toys and stuff in the free play area. And we went and we got like more nature-based toys that were of more natural material, more eco-friendly in their production. And the director at the time at the preschool was totally jazzed and loved it. And the kids really responded to it. And then in my third year of teaching, I had one kid who like will always be such a golden gem in my heart. I mean, he changed my life. And he was definitely on the spectrum and like just beginning to get a diagnosis, and as it is and at age 4, you know, him and I just connected. He had such self-regulation issues. His parents had a hard time understanding him. The school had a hard time knowing what to do for him. And I had already had the garden set up. And so every day we would go spend some time in the garden, and things that he couldn't do in class that felt, you know, too much sensory wise, he was able to do in the garden, whether it be touch the dirt, pick plants, smell different smells on the different types of herbs that we had out there. Mind you, it was a very small garden, and I want to keep in mind that it doesn't matter how much space you have. Like you can make a garden anywhere, even if it's just a little balcony garden. And I felt like an affinity for this idea of how can we promote therapeutics in the outdoors. And he was really a testament to that for me.
I want to jump in here because there's so much good stuff going on. And I think that's so cool how you talked about how this kiddo responded to working in the garden, playing in the garden. I mean, just being engaged in the act of gardening and all of kind of that sensory stimuli, the sights, the smells, the touch, everything, really how he was able to start to connect with the plants and connect with you and start to kind of understand a little bit more about kind of what's going on in his life. And I think that just shows kind of the importance of active engagement in an occupation and how that can influence your health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It seemed like we were just scratching the surface with him of, you know, the roots of what we were doing with the garden with him was just for self-regulation. You know, like he would be having breakdowns in class and emotionally like he would go from 0 to 100 really fast, and quick motivation and quick turnaround came when it would be like, okay, you want to go outside? Let's go take a break. Let's go to the garden. And he'd be like, okay. And be like, okay, let's calm ourselves first. Let's take a few breaths before we go to the garden because we need to be calm for the plant. And I remember it would turn him around really fast because that intrinsic motivation was present to wanting to be outside with plants and wanting to play with them or work with them in whatever way that he felt inclined in that day. But yeah, it was really moving for me. And I think it was, you know, exceptional that he had that space to go to. After working with him, I was like, okay, I need to figure out a way to work with kids, work in special needs, and work with community and school gardens. How can I do that?
I think this just kind of goes back to pretty much anybody as an occupational therapist or an occupational therapist assistant. It's really when you start working with a client, it's developing that rapport.
Totally.
And it's getting that connection and establishing kind of this common ground, even if you're not necessarily doing anything right at the beginning that is of their occupation or anything like that, but it's really just getting that connection to get them to open up, to get them to break down any of the boundaries that they might have, any of the walls that they've put up, or anxiety, depression, anything that is kind of shadowing their ability to engage in life right now.
Right, totally. It's the opportunity of facilitating what they're already into, but also having the opportunity to create something new that might feel motivating for them or might feel like they have purpose in a new way.
Do you remember, did this kiddo, had he had any opportunity before the school and before you coming in to be in a garden? Was his family into it? Was there any kind of thing that he had experience with before?
I don't think so. I think that a common ailment for children growing up in the city, and oftentimes, and you'd probably see that as a pediatric occupational therapist, is that a lot of their lives are lived in boxes. You know, they're moving from the classroom or their bedroom to a car, being strapped in a car seat, then being strapped in a stroller, then going from a stroller to back to the car. And then there's not as much opportunity for free movement. And then on top of that, a lot of times in development during their earlier stages in life, they have to be quiet or they have to be able to withstand the car ride. So an iPad turns on or a car TV turns on and the eyes are focused on a general location, like a pretty small sized location. So I feel like that we have a lot of, not that growing up in a city is bad, but you can lose awareness as far as like how that hinders on development. Like, are the eyes moving? For example, like I use this a lot with parents and explaining that when they're outside, they move their eyes to look at an ant and then they look up and then they look at the horizon, and the eyes are moving from a very narrow viewpoint to a wider scope. And that's exercise for those muscles, and that's development for those muscles. And that's why the outdoors are very important for kids to have that access.
I love that you just brought up kind of that technology piece, because I have definitely seen a massive shift in my clientele, over the past decade, and the influence of technology. There are so many good things that have come out of it.
Totally. Like, you can get language out of it. You can get communication out of technology. Absolutely. Yeah. But there are hard things.
Yeah. And I think especially working in pediatrics, we are really kind of seeing a lot of the negative influences that technology is having. And I shouldn't say it's necessarily the technology, but it's the reason that the technology is being used. And it's being used as a pacifier. It's being used as a babysitter. And rather than having the parent or the caregiver be engaged with the child in play, they're just passing off a tablet or a phone. It's to keep them quiet. It's to keep them occupied so they don't have to be doing anything else. And I think it's really important to kind of point out how I love that you were saying when they're outside, you know, the eyes are moving from a small realm, a small object to looking over the horizon or, you know, turning over their shoulder. But it's also utilizing their whole body. And when they're sitting with a tablet, they're just sitting or laying down. They're not really exploring their body. They're not moving. They're not getting any of that kind of whole body sensory input.
Totally. Yeah. And I think what gardens offer is an opportunity to have some engagement where the whole body is moving. It's just another forum of which to do that. To me, because there was a passion of environmental conservation and there was a passion of development, gardens, school gardens and community gardens made the most sense to me. And so when I went for my master's and I found occupational therapy, I was like, hallelujah, I found something that I can work with the Western model that allows for this integration, basically, this integration of environment and human development.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it was cool for me too. I was like, oh, wow, I hit a gem here. Like I felt really lucky to have found it and continue to, like, every day when I work outside with the kids, anytime I'm out with them, I'm like, I love my job because I am able to use a garden therapeutically if I choose, you know, and if the child is interested, which most of the time I will say they are.
I think another thing that, as you were talking, that just kind of came into my mind was you're using the occupation of gardening and everything that goes into it. But then if you kind of back out and look at the bigger picture, you're also teaching the kiddos to plant something that's small and then encourage that growth and that progress. And after a couple of weeks, a couple months, whatever it is that you're growing, they get to see a final kind of project or presentation of that plant.
Absolutely.
And everything that it's gone through.
Right. And it's really incredible because we're able to take it even further. So after we grow something, I run cooking classes too with them. And that's cooking is the most important. I had a professor tell me the most important OT treatment session you can do is cooking. It has everything in it. You have your visual motor, you have your fine motor, you have your gross motor, you have your sequencing, you have your executive functioning, you have all these elements in that session of just cooking a meal. And so I felt the extension of that was to grow parts or some of the things that you could do to make that meal. And what ends up happening when the kids are able to grow it and then they're able to learn how to use that plant and learn how to prepare that plant for consumption, they're getting this connection with a healthy edible pretty much, but then also getting this connection of functional skills, of self-sufficiency. So they're getting this ability to see the full spectrum of what a plant can do for us. And then we can have conversations around why it's important to take care of our soil, why it's important to take care of plants, why is it important to care for our planet. We can get as far as that depending on what, conceptually what they're able to process.
That is really fascinating.
Yeah, and then also get into what makes our bodies healthy. I have an opportunity for nutrition education. I have an opportunity to go into what are whole foods versus processed foods. So I feel that by doing this type of therapy session, I'm able to incorporate not only all of fine motor, gross motor, visual motor, all those types of skills that we're trying to facilitate as OTs in that population, but I can bring in the math and the science and the academics on top of social justice, on top of environmental justice. And it just seemed like one of the better forms for me to engage in as an occupational therapist.
It's really like you can make it as microscopic as you want to,
right?
And really focus on the plant. And if that's what the child can understand, you are focusing specifically on the plant and making sure that the soil's good, they're watering it when they need to, the sunlight matches the need of the plant and everything like that.
Right.
But then I love how you just said that you can really kind of back out and look at the grand scale and look at the planet as a whole and go from the plant to then all of a sudden you can look at the child and then you can look at the family and then the society that the family lives in and then pretty much the entire world.
Totally.
And that is so cool.
Right. Yeah. Even down to like, you know, in college and my undergrad, we learned a lot about social justice and environmental justice. And a lot of communities that are low income don't have access to fresh foods. Like a lot of their markets, I think there was a study done where they looked at a community in the Bay Area. I don't know if it was Oakland at the time, or I can't remember all the details, but it wasn't the amount of distance between a person's house on average to a grocery store where they could get fresh food was minimum 5 miles. And so if you're talking about a family that doesn't own a car, that has limited funds, basically to get to a grocery store, they would have to spend their whole day getting there. And so that was limiting their access to fresh foods. And in that same study, they counted how many liquor stores were within a mile radius, and it was like exponentially different than access to a grocery store. So that study kind of launched this idea of food justice. And are we allowing low-income communities to have access to fresh whole foods? And that's where a lot of the community garden movement came up too, was that, okay, if they can't make it to grocery stores and they can't afford that and they can't, you know, get in travel, don't have the time with all the things they have going on, can we test soils around the area and teach them how to plant things and get back to roots and get back to self-sufficiency? And I work in Richmond, which a lot of those students that I have do come from low income families. And so for me to be able to teach them, how do you grow something so you can eat it, so you can bring it home to your family, so you can share it with your loved ones, so you all as a community can be healthy, so you all as a community can be empowered, that felt like the most important message that I could extend from whatever it is, if we're going full scope rather than microscope, you know. Right. What I could send to that community and what I would want and choose to be part of.
I just wanted to highlight, you said food justice, and I think that word that's just a really intriguing. And you know, I've heard about occupational justice and all like these kind of different terms, but food justice, that just really kind of stood out to me. And what an interesting study that you were just talking about. And what kind of popped into my head was, because I know you said grocery stores and liquor stores, I'd be curious how many fast food restaurants or non-healthy options were really close to those families.
Yes, and that I think that was in the study as well. I wish I could remember. It was like 12 years ago I read it or something like that. But it was astounding. It was astounding, and definitely a topic on food justice. I encourage a lot of OTs to get into it if possible, because again, like I said in the beginning, what drew me the most to OT was this opportunity for intimacy, and the intimacy on so many levels. Like, it's such an act to eat food and to eat healthy food, and it's daily, and it's definitely one of our activities of daily living. And the connection we have with food is so important and has been lost with major agriculture and has been lost with, you know, cities and disconnection of where our food comes from. Oftentimes when you go into a classroom and you ask kids, you know, where did this lettuce come from? Where did this tomato come from? I guarantee you'll get some answers that say from the market.
Yeah. And something that I've noticed too is, especially kiddos that might be on the spectrum or have very kind of specific things that they like. And if they have a very restricted diet, a lot of times it has to be a specific company, a specific brand and unit of whatever that company is providing.
Right.
And if you try to switch it up, that kid knows.
Totally.
And honestly, that's just marketing and branding. And so many times, like when I've been working with like feeding therapy, we'll present some food and the kiddo just kind of freaks out. And we almost have to back up of like, oh, okay, let's start with a real apple. This is what it looks like. You want to touch it, you can smell it, you can roll it around, whatever you want to do with it. Now watch, we're going to cut into it. Now we're going to look at the inside of it. So even just looking on that level of just what the food is actually looking like, and again, then where it's coming from. Yeah, that's really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. Like backing it up even further and being a participant in the growth of that. And I guarantee you, like almost every time you engage with not just children, I did it in stroke rehab too. You know, when you engage with people in that way of like coming to the roots of their sustenance, the roots of their being, and allowing them to participate in it, they always gain a new perspective. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to include the cooking classes, especially with my autism population, was to expand feeding, you know, to expand food choices, to expand exposure to different foods, and they were able to engage in a different way because they had engaged in the growing of the plant. So it was familiar to them. They saw it from seed to finish, you know, that's incredible to them. And it gives a reflection of, I believe, of like worthiness of, not worthiness, but like this reflection of themselves, of growth, of understanding growth and conceptualizing growth.
Mm-hmm. So I know you mentioned a little bit ago about garden size, and I'm sure there's people that might be listening to this about, well, I don't have the space to have a garden. I don't have the resources to be able to do this within the schools that I work for or the organizations that I work for. And so would you touch a little bit about how you were able to kind of finagle this within the school districts and within your own life and all of that?
I would love to. Yeah. So I grew up in Los Angeles, heart of Los Angeles, went to LAUSD, you know, like I understand this limited access to dirt and soil. Luckily, I had really amazing lineage of gardeners. Like both my grandfathers were amazing gardeners. My mother, my father, like they always had some sort of garden, even if it was limited in space. They really took their time to engage in that because it was therapeutic for them and it was in their upbringing. You know, having a fresh tomato was in their upbringing. To me, I was able to see creative ways of how to use space really easily and sometimes cheap ways of how to do it also. So as an OT, you know, you're buying bins and you're buying things, you're getting all these little different plastics for your therapy sessions. I encourage you to think about how can you reuse items. Like very, very often we have like a lot of little plastic bins that we can just poke some holes in, find some dirt, add to it, get it on a windowsill in the classroom. And that's enough. You know, 3 seeds is enough. And then if you want a little bit more, like maybe, you know, to some of the bins that we would put a kid in, like a big bin. I don't know what size gallon they are. I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about? The like storage Tupperware bins.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That we would put like beans in. And so they could do sensory play in there. That could be switched and just be a garden bin. And that could be, you fill it up with dirt, add some plants, make sure there's holes in the plastic so that the water can drain, find a good place for some sun, and you got it. And if you don't have sun, you can find plants that do well in shade. So that's another way to think about it. As far as if you want it to be more of an expansive idea or a larger idea, we have as therapists a lot of access to money that we don't know about, especially in the education system. I recently just got a grant for $1,000 from the Ed Fund. Before that, I did 2 grants with Donors Choose for $500 each that basically bought me like garden beds, soil. You can buy all these things online now. So a lot of times those grants that only allow you to buy equipment from certain suppliers also have things like Amazon or Home Depot on those suppliers, and you're able to get items from them as well in your grants that you write for yourself. And most people, when you write those grants, most people do want to fund them, one, because you're connecting to environmental justice. you're connecting to food justice, especially if it's a low income, underserved population. And then you're connecting to people with special needs that are living with special needs that are often marginalized and often under-resourced. And having those three things that allow for a donor to really feel good about the project they're donating to, like you're in accordance with thinking about it in the big picture. And a lot of times when I write those grants too, I note that not only will my students have access to all these things, it's a school-wide access. I don't put my gardens just for my kids. The kindergarteners down the hall, they have access to it. I buy them a few watering cans and I tell the teacher, I'll come in for a little bit. I'll give them a little lesson about how to take care of plants, and then you guys can water it because I actually need your help on the days I'm not here. So it's a really good way to engage the whole community, to integrate everybody within the system. Another way that you can do it is where you get the parents together, you work with the PTA, and you do a garden work day. Sometimes you might not notice if you're working in the school district that your school actually already has garden beds. So there was a big push in the early 2000s for California school gardens. And that came, I think, with Schwarzenegger. I don't know exactly what year he was governor, but one of his projects was to fund a lot of school gardens, and there was a lot of research coming out at that time about how effective they are for nutritional health for the children as they age, and for basically, as we would look at occupational health, for doing physical activity, for being outside, for engaging in movement and connection with the community. And so what ended up happening was a lot of California schools got funding to build these garden beds, and they did. But then they didn't have a garden teacher to sustain them. So it was really up to the teacher that originally was interested in getting funding for these gardens. They would do the grant, let's say they retired, and then the garden beds are just sitting there. So take a look around as an OT, especially if you're in school-based, you might find garden beds in the school that you can utilize and, repurpose and make it your treatment area.
I feel like those are some really good things that you just brought up about kind of just looking into what the resources are within the schools or within the organization, if we're looking kind of at a grander scope, and seeing what they already have in terms of materials. I mean, I love that you were talking about just using like a plastic container. I'm thinking like a yogurt container or something like that. Put some holes into it, and that can turn into a plant, a mini garden. Or you can see what they already have. And if they have a garden bed, or even if they just have open space that they're not doing anything with, even if it's cemented over, you can bring in some different containers and set it up. So utilizing what's there, but then also kind of utilizing your occupational therapy brain to accommodate and figure out how you can best implement this type of program into any space, regardless of size or materials that you have on hand.
Right. And the example you're setting of, being able to conceptually say like, oh, I don't need to have a ton of dirt. I can make a small garden no matter where I am. And as those kids age and grow up, and if they become independent and live independently, have the opportunity to engage in let's say it's a balcony garden or, a patio garden or something like that is occupationally important to them. Area of relaxation, area of sustenance, area of self-sufficiency, area of connection. Like you're really allowing for that opportunity for growth there.
Yeah, even if it's just in, like, I think they call them like kitchen sink gardens,
right?
Where it's like right on the ledge of the kitchen, or just a plant that's inside. I hear that so many times, especially being in LA, that people are like, oh, you have a garden. You're so lucky that you have space for a garden, but it doesn't necessarily have to take up a lot of space.
It doesn't at all. And sometimes you have to be realistic with what you could manage too,
Right.
Like I have a total of 5 garden beds at one school and 4 garden boxes at another. And I have to see, so many kids in a week. Like and manage the garden to keep up the space so I can use it for therapy sessions, like, yeah, I can't really add much more on my plate, you know?
Yeah. And I like that you said kind of reaching out to the other classrooms or other people that are affiliated with that organization or the school to help you out with that. Because again, it's not just you and your clients. If we're looking at it through the grander scale, it's empowering other individuals around us, looking at the families, looking at the society, looking at the communities as a whole.
Absolutely. Giving an opportunity for them to all come together. Absolutely. Yeah. Occupational therapy can also be seen as opportunity therapy.
I love it.
Yeah,
I haven't heard that before.
Yeah, I feel like that's a lot of our job, is just creating opportunities for success, for engagement, for motivation, for regulation. Like, it's pretty amazing. It really, really, it's an amazing profession.
I completely 100% agree with that. So I want to switch gears just a little bit, and because I know you have so many other likes outside of this garden therapy, and food and cooking and everything that we just talked about. But I know that you're also really big into combining Eastern and Western health practices, and by that I'm specifically talking about yoga.
Yeah. So yeah, I do use yoga a lot. I got certified. So I grew up, my mother began doing yoga when she was 18. She had diphtheria, and my grandfather was always so worried about her moving and overexerting herself. And for some reason, he didn't see yoga as something that did that to her. So that was like pretty much the only exercise she could do without him being worried about her. So she found this little book and she learned yoga from a book. And then ever since she was 18, she practices yoga every day for 20 minutes. And I grew up with it. I grew up with the breathing exercises. I grew up with the postures. I grew up with the asana, with the different movements. And when I finally, like, it was kind of always on my list of, like, you know, I need to delve into that a little further if I really want to feel like I can integrate it into my therapies. I wanted to do a teacher training. So I ended up doing one in Berkeley in 2016. And that was really helpful. I also had suffered my own injury when I was 23. I herniated a disc in my back. And so yoga, going into this type of yoga that I was doing, which is more, it's called forest yoga, and it has elements of, the person that created it is really sensitive to chronic pain and trauma. So a lot of the yoga training also spoke to chronic pain and trauma, which as OTs, we deal with a lot, since we are like the front line of human suffering. So to have that training in the sense of the yoga really allowed me to kind of take it to another level rather than just like self-care. Even elements of like certain postures triggering or eliciting a different response amongst different populations, like somebody that might have been in an abusive relationship or might have, you know, suffered a certain accident in a certain part of their body. It allowed me to understand the grander scope of what I can do therapeutically with utilizing yoga as a modality.
I think it's really fascinating just listening to how much your history and your upbringing has really kind of tied you into what you are doing clinically and professionally nowadays.
Right. Yeah, it's a huge, huge part of my career path. My grandfather recently just died, like in the beginning of the year in January. And my eulogy to him was, he taught me everything I know about health. He taught me everything down to self-care practices, to what you eat nutritionally, to what you grow in your backyard, and how to take really good care of yourself in order to take care of others. And I truly appreciated that in him and thanked him.
That is so absolutely beautiful. Oh man. Don't know where to go from there, because that is just so awesome. And it's really been amazing because I met you as a student, and it's really been amazing for me to watch you. I mean, you came in and I remember the first day that I met you and I was like, this girl is going places. Like, she is going to make drastic changes within the world. And over the years, it's just been super just wonderful being able to watch everything that you've accomplished and everything that you have been able to set up and get going within your professional life.
Thanks, Sarah. I felt that way about you. I mean, so for the listeners, Sarah was one of my clinical instructors. And I think like you just taught me so much of your presence, for one, with each kid when we worked together was so inspiring. And then two was your creativity. Like I remember just learning so much from how you could meet a kid and get creative really fast in what they needed at that moment. And also your skills of observation. I don't think I would have learned nearly as much if I didn't have you in my early training life of how to really watch, like, how's the head moving? How are the eyes moving? How is the body moving? And it really helps because I think for me, I can get really macro, and I so appreciated how fine-tuned you were in your micro.
I think what we can say is that honestly, both of us learned so much from each other.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I was fairly young in my career when we worked together, and I just remember I was just doing my job. Like I don't remember doing anything special or anything like that. So
right.
It's really kind of crazy for me to hear that all of these things that I was doing had an influence on you. And
absolutely, yeah.
I think that just goes to show if you do a good job and you invest yourself into what you're doing, you're going to have an impact on somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. And set a good foundation for them. And I mean, you've really like gone to amazing places in your career too. I mean, even just this podcast. Thank you for making a podcast.
You're welcome. And thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
There is one more thing that I wanted to talk about that is so cool. And I don't know too much about it. I've had a couple friends that have gone that path, but none have been OTs and then also pursued it.
Yeah.
But I know that you have recently also started to incorporate some doula work. So maybe if you could kind of explain a little bit about what that is and how you integrate occupational therapy within that practice.
Right. Okay. So let me also just touch upon, so I'm an Ayurvedic doula, and Ayurveda is the sister science of yoga. And it's heavily based in self-care practices that that work with seasons, that work with body work, that work with nutrition, that work with nature elements. And so I was really attracted to Ayurveda originally because I used to read about it and read books about it when I was 18. And when I went to OT school, a lot of parallels were there for me. They focus a lot in Ayurveda on the sensory systems and the things that we do in our daily lives to engage with our senses. And a lot of health and development is based around what you do to engage the senses in the day. And I was like, wow, that's freaking sensory processing and sensory integration, from a science that started thousands of years ago. So I went and I studied that for a whole year. I went to an Ayurveda program in Sebastopol at the Dhyana Center of Therapeutics, and I did a year-long program with them there. And I wanted to originally integrate it into my therapy services, which since I'm still in the process of learning it now and integrating it, it hasn't become fully part of my OT life yet. But since I did have this doula thing in the background that I really enjoyed, I really enjoy the birthing world. I really enjoy the support you can provide to mothers and partners and families. I felt that Ayurveda was a way much easier access into the doula world, but my hope is to get it so integrated into my cells that I'm able to also infuse it in the occupational therapy world. But why I originally wanted to do doula work also was that I felt as an OT, there was this another opportunity to be able to go on a larger scope of support and therapy. So I felt that if I was involved in the birthing process and like preparing parents and allowing parents to have a pillar of support in this process and this journey and this transformation, that if any of those kids that they had at some point in their life, they needed support and development, or even just reassurance for the parents that, yeah, they're doing great, I felt that I was able to provide a larger spectrum of support for them. And so we often get kids in OT, like if you're not working in the 0 to 3, you get them around 3-4 years old. And I felt that if I wanted to be a more holistic entity with my company, was that I was able to meet a parent before they even had their child, that I was able to give them all the support that I could, even before the child had an opportunity to interact with the world.
And that is so important. And I think, at least for me, I know I used to work in pediatrics of like all ages. Mm-hmm. And over the years, I realized that I'd be getting these kiddos that were coming to me that were 8 years old, 10 years old, and had never had any sort of formal therapy before. Mm-hmm. And in my heart, I'm like, if I had just gotten to them when they were 2 months old, 6 months old, when they were younger, we'd be at a completely different level. And to be honest with you, I hadn't really thought about going even before that they were born. And even before their thought of being born, until this past year. I remember I was talking to somebody and they kind of brought that to my attention. I'm like, that is so important, because it's not just starting the day that they're born. There are so many other things that we as OTs can bring to the table to help the mother, to help the father, to help the families in preparation of having a child, and alleviating some of the stress and talking them through coping strategies of dealing with the changes and all of this
what to expect, first time parents, what to expect. What is development? What are the reflexes? Our job a lot of times is to educate, right? We want the carryover. We can't be with the kids 24 hours a day. So we spend our therapy time, educating and training people that are with them more often. So when we have this period prenatally with parents to explain what is the sensory system? What are good things for a child when they're just born? Like how do we slow it down? Like, for example, you want to move 6 times slower when a child is first born. You don't want to take them out into the world right away. You want them to be able to integrate all their senses at a slower pace and let their nervous system adjust to this new world. And I think that we don't have that opportunity as OTs to just it's almost like preventative medicine, right? Because when you're doing education in these areas and allowing and empowering these parents to have a more holistic view of their child, like those are the kids that probably aren't going to end up on your caseload, because the parents are there. The parents are feeling like they are understanding these stages of development and how they can best support. And if they do end up on your caseload, it ends up not being such a shock for them because they were introduced to concepts early on. That's how I see it. I mean, that might change as my practice gets more expansive and works more with people, but that's the intention at this point, is to provide empowerment in that journey.
Yeah, and just addressing the preventative healthcare right from the very, very beginning and before anything even becomes problematic. And gosh, I wish that the entire healthcare industry, I wish we could get back to this rather than just treating when something is already an issue, going back to way before that and really just promoting education and health and wellness at the bottom level.
Right. Exactly. Yep.
So you keep mentioning your company and your practice. And so I'd love for you to just take a minute to explain how all of these things that we've kind of been talking about today, how you are integrating them in your practice.
Right. So I started my private practice about a year ago, and I work full time for the school district. So there's only so much time I have. But I've really felt that it was important to me to spend my summer breaks not working in the schools. I wanted to work with families more. I wanted to be able, especially because we work in school district, we have this amazing summer vacation. So I was like, how can I take that amount of time rather than just traveling or relaxing, which is great. I think it's wonderful to do that. But I wanted to take that time to like grow and further this idea of what occupational therapy means for me and what I want it to look like in the world for others. So I started this practice. I started my company. I call it Deedee Levine Therapeutics. And the reason I call it that is because I feel like I have all these different elements of therapeutics, whether it be occupational therapy, Ayurveda, yoga, or doula work. I felt like it was a more all-encompassing name for what I want to provide. When I started it, I had like maybe like one or two clients, and I still only take like a few clients here and there because I just don't want to overload myself. But as time progresses, I'm hoping that my summers will really be bountiful with, students, with parents, with different programs that I can provide. I have all these ideas and it's all coming into the making. But as you start any company, as you would know, it's a process that you have to allow time for fine tuning and allow time for, even before that, for imagination in order to create what it is you think you want to bring to the world,
And I feel like you don't always know, especially when you start, you might have an idea of what you want to do and what you like to do, but you might not always know exactly the shape that your company is going to fill.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's why I love the field of occupational therapy so much, because we really can pretty much do anything that we want. And you might start and focus one way and then realize, ooh, I need to address this and that and that. And then you expand, and then maybe you learn a new occupation and you fall in love with that. So then you bring that into it. Right. And it's really just kind of all encompassing of anything that you want to make it.
Right. Totally. And it's sometimes even downsize. Sometimes you're like, oh, I'm touching so many elements of life. Like, what can I be more, what can I fine tune and what can I tunnel in on, Yeah, it can go either way. It really can. And I'm definitely excited for this adventure. I feel like, it might turn into more of an educational forum. It might turn into more of private client forum. I'm not quite sure. But as of now, I just have a few clients, and I do a lot of like movement towards Ayurveda doula. I really, really am trying to focus on that. And then also my pediatric clients having access to the outdoors.
So if people wanted to learn more about your company and kind of get in contact with you, how could they reach you?
Yeah, I would love that. So DeedeeLevineTherapeutics.com, and I believe you'll share the link, is my website. And then, and that's always changing. Like I said, it's fine tuning. So I do have a contact section at the bottom of the website, and if anybody's interested or wants to get into research together or wants to just discuss and talk more about different concepts, like I am always down for a conversation. And then also I'm on Instagram at Deedee Levine Therapeutics as well. I'm super excited on seeing what this turns into and, developing my career even more and staying in contact with people like you, Sarah.
Well, I'm excited to see where you go from here. And I, like I mentioned before, it's been absolutely amazing just watching your journey. And I remember the day that you publicized your company on Facebook or Instagram, and I just got this like huge smile on my face. And I was so excited and just so inspired by everything that you were doing. And so I definitely recommend, if anybody has any questions, wants to get into anything that Deedee's talked about, whether it be garden therapy or yoga or doula or even writing grants in order to get funding and setting up programs within schools, please reach out to her. She's an awesome person. And I want to finish the episode with one last question for you. If you had one word to describe OT, what would it be?
Yeah, I think we touched upon it. I think I would stick with opportunity. Like, I really feel that that's what it is. It's opportunity for expansion, for self-reflection, opportunity for anything that you any path you want to go down, redesign, lifestyle. You just have so many opportunities in occupational therapy.
Deedee, this has been absolutely amazing, and I really thank you for taking the time to come on the show, tell a little bit about what you've been working on, the amazing work that you've been doing, and I am so inspired to go tackle the rest of my day right now.
Thank you so much for what you're bringing to our profession and all that you do for occupational therapy.
Hey, before you go, I just wanted to say thanks for listening to today's episode. If you want to further the discussion, go to our website, otforlife.com, and join our Facebook group. If you like us, here are 3 easy ways to let us know. 1. Share our podcast with a friend, colleague, or anyone interested in occupational therapy. 2. Leave us a review on iTunes or anywhere this podcast is found. 3. Subscribe to us so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Thanks again. We'll catch you next time, OT for Lifers.